Flashing police lights sliced through the heavy, humid evening air as a hot-headed young patrolman pinned a decorated black Marine colonel hard against the dusty hood of an aging sedan. What should have been a quiet traffic stop just steps from the fortified gates of a major military installation erupted into a catastrophic clash of jurisdictions that would leave careers shattered and justice finally demanded. Colonel Darius Thorne guided his unassuming 2012 Ford Taurus along the empty coastal highway toward the southern edge of the base. The road stretched ahead in long, lonely curves, the ocean a dark presence beyond the dunes. He was a man whose quiet presence masked the enormous weight he carried. Years of leading infantry battalions through the most unforgiving corners of Fallujah and Helmand had carved deep lines around his eyes and taught him the value of controlled silence. Tonight, he simply wanted to reach his quarters. The high-level strategy meetings at the Pentagon had drained him. He had left the sharply pressed uniform, the eagles, and the rows of ribbons behind. Faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a soft leather jacket were enough. He preferred it this way. Off-duty, he chose an older, forgettable car and ordinary clothes, craving a brief escape from the constant salutes and rigid formalities that defined every other hour of his life. Far behind him, Officer Cole Brennan prowled the same dark stretch of asphalt in a marked oceanside cruiser. Brennan was a dangerous mixture of ambition, insecurity, and unchecked bias. Still early in his career, he had already earned a quiet reputation among his peers for turning minor stops into major confrontations and for hunting any opportunity to assert dominance. He despised the dead quiet of the base perimeter. The Marines stayed inside their heavily guarded sanctuary, leaving him to circle empty commercial lots and silent residential streets. He was hungry for a significant arrest, something that would elevate his standing in the precinct and feed the fragile ego that drove him. When the Taurus's taillights appeared ahead, Brennan's eyes narrowed. The car held a perfect steady speed right at the limit, its trajectory flawless. A calm, rational officer would have seen a careful driver. Brennan saw someone trying far too hard not to be noticed. He accelerated, closing the distance until his headlights lit the back of the colonel's head. He ran the plate. The onboard computer lagged on the out-of-state tags. Thorne had simply re-registered the vehicle in Georgia, a common practice for military families who moved often, but Brennan marked it suspicious at once. He never waited for the return. When the Taurus's tires brushed the painted white line by the smallest fraction, Brennan flipped the switch on his light bar. Blinding blue and red strobes shattered the darkness, reflecting violently off the dusty trunk. Inside the Ford, Thorne let out a long, bone-deep sigh of pure exhaustion. He checked the rearview mirror, squinting against the harsh glare. He knew he had committed no violation. His driving record was spotless. His situational awareness, sharpened by decades of combat and tactical training, told him everything was under control. Less than a short distance ahead lay the yellow jurisdictional line that marked where county authority ended and federal military property began. He engaged his right turn signal, decelerated smoothly, and pulled over just past that line, stopping in the well-lit approach lane leading to the guard shack. Brennan slammed his cruiser into park directly behind the Taurus. He unbuckled with aggressive urgency, never noticing or simply choosing to ignore the federal boundary. His focus locked entirely on the driver. He stepped out into the cool night air, right hand heavy on the butt of his service weapon, retention strap already loose. He approached with a slow, exaggerated swagger, shining a powerful tactical flashlight directly into the driver's side mirror to blind the occupant. Thorne rolled the window down and placed both hands firmly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. It was a survival habit. Even a man who commanded thousands of heavily armed troops understood the precarious reality of a nighttime traffic stop for a black man in America. He kept every movement deliberate, every breath controlled, every word carefully measured. "Evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Brennan stopped just behind the B-pillar, keeping himself out of direct line of sight. He blasted the blinding beam straight into Thorne's face, illuminating the deep exhaustion in the older man's eyes. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Keep your hands where I can see them, buddy." Thorne remained perfectly still. "My wallet is in my right back pocket, officer. Registration is in the glove compartment. I am going to reach for them now. Is that understood?" Brennan sneered and leaned closer. "I didn't ask for a play-by-play. Just get the documents. Move slow. Carefully." Deliberately, Thorne shifted his weight, pulled the worn leather wallet from his jeans, and handed over his Georgia driver's license, along with his military identification. He hoped the Department of Defense card would end the tension at once, signaling that the officer was dealing with a senior military official standing on the threshold of his own installation. Brennan snatched the cards, barely glancing at them. He saw a black man in a beat-up car near a military base late at night with an out-of-state license, and the story in his head was already complete. He shoved the military ID back without reading it. "I don't care about your gym membership or whatever fake contractor badge this is. I asked for registration and insurance. What are you doing out here? You're a long way from Georgia, boy." The word struck like a physical blow. A cold, hardened steel settled over Thorne's demeanor. He had been called many things in his life, but that particular brand of racial contempt had not touched him since he was a teenager. The disrespect was unmistakable, yet his discipline remained absolute. He did not raise his voice. He did not break eye contact. "Officer Brennan," he said, reading the nameplate on the cop's chest, "I suggest you look closely at that identification. I am Colonel Darius Thorne, United States Marine Corps. You have pulled me over inside the jurisdictional line of this military installation, which I command. I am returning to my quarters." Brennan laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet night. "Right, and I'm the commandant of the Marine Corps. You expect me to believe a guy driving a junker in a dirty t-shirt is a full-bird colonel? Step out of the vehicle. Now." Tension thickened the air until it felt suffocating. Thorne remained seated, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned pale. He ran a rapid tactical assessment. He was completely unarmed, seated in a disadvantageous position, facing a highly agitated, armed law enforcement officer operating under severe racial bias and a dangerous superiority complex. Refusing a lawful order to exit the vehicle, even an unjust one, would hand Brennan the legal pretext to escalate to physical force or worse. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave into the tone he usually reserved for reprimanding battalion commanders, "I am stepping out of the vehicle. I am unarmed. I strongly advise you to contact your watch commander and verify my identity before you make a catastrophic career mistake." Brennan yanked the driver's door open, stepped back, and drew his taser, laser sight locked dead center on Thorne's chest. "Shut your mouth and get out. Face away from me. Do it now." Slowly, Thorne swung his legs out of the car and stood to his full 6'2" height, towering over the slightly shorter officer. Despite the casual clothing, he carried himself with the unmistakable posture of a lifelong military man, spine perfectly straight, shoulders squared, chin parallel to the ground. He turned his back, laced his fingers together, and placed them on the back of his head without being asked. He knew the drill. Brennan grabbed him roughly by the collar of the leather jacket and slammed the colonel's chest against the dusty roof of the Taurus. The impact knocked the wind from Thorne's lungs and sent a sharp spike of pain through his shoulder. Brennan kicked his legs apart with the toe of a heavy boot, forcing him into a vulnerable spread-eagle stance. "You think you can lie to me?" Brennan hissed, breath hot against the back of Thorne's neck as he began aggressively patting down pockets that held nothing. "You think flashing a fake military ID makes you bulletproof? People like you come sniffing around the base looking to steal equipment or deal drugs to the recruits. I know exactly what you are." Gritting his teeth against the searing humiliation and physical pain, Thorne stared straight ahead. Less than 200 yards away, the massive, brightly lit archway of Gate 4 stood like a fortress in the night. He could see the concrete reinforced barriers, the bulletproof glass of the guard shack, and the silhouettes of his own Marines standing post. He was on his own territory. Brennan's cruiser sat squarely across the painted yellow boundary line. They were technically standing on federal property. "You have crossed into federal jurisdiction, officer," Thorne stated calmly, though anger had begun to boil just beneath his disciplined surface. "You have no legal authority to conduct a traffic stop or an arrest on this side of the boundary line without the presence of military police. Release me." Infuriated by the calm defiance, Brennan yanked Thorne's arms down violently, twisted the wrists behind his back, and locked the steel handcuffs with a sharp, metallic ratcheting sound. He clamped them tight, intentionally pinching the skin over the wrist bones. "I have jurisdiction wherever I say I have jurisdiction, buddy." He spun the handcuffed colonel around and shoved him hard against the side of the car. "You are under arrest for driving under the influence, failure to obey a lawful order, and resisting arrest. We'll see how cocky you are sitting in a holding cell." Standing tall despite having his hands bound, Thorne locked eyes with the young officer. There was no fear in the colonel's gaze, only a cold, calculating fury. "You have just kidnapped a federal officer on a United States military installation. When this is over, you will not have a badge, and you will be lucky if you do not face federal charges." Inside the ballistic glass of the Gate 4 guardhouse, Corporal Vance Ellison watched the entire interaction unfold. Young, sharply dressed in desert camouflage, Kevlar helmet strapped tight, M4 rifle slung across his chest, he was the front line of base defense. When the police lights first activated, he had simply noted the stop in his logbook, assuming it was a routine civilian matter just outside the gate. But as he watched the officer drag the driver out and slam him against the hood, his instincts ignited. He lifted a pair of heavy military-grade binoculars and adjusted the focus. The high-powered optics cut through the glare of the strobes, bringing the scene into sharp detail. He focused on the face of the man pinned against the car and froze. His breath caught. He lowered the binoculars, blinked hard, and raised them again. There was no mistaking that face. Only a short time earlier, that exact man had pinned a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal onto Ellison's own chest. He knew the jawline, the piercing eyes, the unmistakable posture. Ellison dropped the binoculars, heart hammering. He slammed his hand onto the communications console. "Sergeant of the Guard, this is Gate 4. His voice abandoned calm protocol for absolute urgency. "We have a massive code red situation at the perimeter. Local PD is currently assaulting and detaining base actual." Static crackled. The duty sergeant's gruff voice answered. "Gate 4, repeat your last. Did you say base actual?" "Affirmative. An Oceanside PD officer has crossed the federal boundary line. He has Colonel Thorne in handcuffs and is actively assaulting him on the hood of his vehicle. I need the quick reaction force and the provost marshal out here right now. He is on our side of the line." Inside the heavily fortified provost marshal's office, the radio transmission landed like a bomb. The idea of a local patrolman physically attacking the base commander on federal property was so unprecedented it bordered on surreal. But the Marines did not hesitate. Within moments, alarms began to blare across the military police compound. Heavily armed MPs sprinted toward their armored response vehicles. Back at the gate, Corporal Ellison watched Brennan begin forcefully dragging the handcuffed colonel toward the back of the police cruiser, roughly pushing the commanding officer's head down to shove him into the cramped, plastic-lined back seat. Ellison knew he could not wait for the quick reaction force. He had to secure the perimeter and prevent the officer from leaving with the colonel. Moving with practiced precision, he sprinted back into the guard shack, unlocked the red emergency panel, and slammed his palm onto the large glowing button. Deafening sirens instantly shattered the quiet night, a terrifying mechanical wail that echoed for miles. The ground beneath Officer Brennan's boots began to tremble violently. Just as he was about to force Thorne into the cruiser, he froze and looked around in sudden panic. Massive steel crash barriers, Delta barriers designed to stop a fully loaded explosive truck traveling at highway speed, erupted from the asphalt directly in front of the police cruiser, blocking the entire roadway. Simultaneously, heavy steel gates slammed shut across the exit lanes. Bright halogen searchlights snapped on from the guard towers, converging their brilliant beams onto the Oceanside cruiser and bathing both men in an intense, inescapable glare. Brennan shielded his eyes, entirely disoriented. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, false bravado crumbling. He reached for his radio intending to call for backup, but the blare of the base alarms drowned every other sound. Standing perfectly still in the harsh light, Thorne looked down at the young officer. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of the colonel's mouth. "That is the sound of your career ending, officer. I told you, you are on my base." Before Brennan could process the threat, the roar of heavy diesel engines cut through the sirens. 3 armored military police vehicles, lights flashing red and blue, came skidding to a halt just behind the deployed barriers. Doors flew open in perfect synchronization. A squad of 8 military police Marines in full tactical gear, Kevlar vests, ballistic helmets, M4 assault rifles, poured out and moved with terrifying silent efficiency, fanning into a tactical wedge as they advanced. Leading them was Captain Grant Ellery, the duty provost marshal. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated fury. Seeing the base commander handcuffed and pinned against a car by a local cop sent a shockwave of adrenaline through the entire squad. Ellery raised a handheld megaphone. "Oceanside police officer, step away from the prisoner immediately. Keep your hands clearly visible and step back from the vehicle. You are currently operating outside of your jurisdiction and are in violation of federal law." Brennan's heart hammered in his throat. He looked at the laser sights dancing across the hood of his cruiser, then at the cold, unblinking eyes of the Marines surrounding him. The power dynamic had shifted so violently and completely that he felt physically dizzy. His mind raced, desperately trying to justify his actions and reassert authority. "Back off!" he shouted, voice cracking with fear. He foolishly rested a hand on his holstered firearm. "This is a local police matter. This man is under arrest for DUI and resisting. I am taking him in." Always. The reaction was instantaneous. Every Marine raised a rifle, aiming dead center at Brennan's chest. The mechanical clacking of safety selectors switching from safe to semi-automatic echoed in the tense air. "Do not touch your weapon," Ellery roared, dropping the megaphone and drawing his own sidearm as he stepped directly up to the yellow boundary line. "If you unholster that firearm on a federal military installation, you will be considered a hostile threat, and we will engage you. Step away from the colonel." Sweat poured down Brennan's face, stinging his eyes. He slowly, shakily lifted his hands into the air and stepped backward until he bumped into the side of his cruiser. He looked around frantically for an escape route that did not exist. The crushing weight of reality finally shattered his ego. He had profoundly, unforgivably miscalculated. "Unlock the cuffs," Ellery commanded, voice cold and flat as he marched past the boundary line, entirely ignoring Brennan's police authority. "Do it very slowly." Trembling violently, Brennan reached for his belt, retrieved the handcuff keys, and stepped forward. His hands shook so badly he struggled to insert the tiny key. With a sharp click, the steel bracelet sprang open. Thorne rubbed his bruised wrists and brought his arms forward. He did not look at his hands. He kept his eyes locked on Brennan. The colonel stepped away from the car and straightened his leather jacket. The physical dominance he projected was absolute. He did not need a uniform to command the space. His presence alone demanded total submission. "Captain Ellery," Thorne said, voice calm and cutting effortlessly through the tension. Ellery snapped to attention, holstered his weapon, and rendered a crisp salute. Every Marine in the perimeter immediately dropped their weapons to their sides and followed suit, snapping sharp salutes to the man in the dirty t-shirt. "Stand down, Marines," Thorne ordered, returning the salute casually. "Captain, disarm this officer. Confiscate his communications equipment. I is to be detained in the Provost Marshal's holding facility for kidnapping, assault on a federal officer, and trespassing on a military installation. Then I want you to get the Oceanside Chief of Police on the phone. Tell him to come collect his garbage." Brennan opened his mouth to protest, to beg, to explain, but the words died in his throat. 2 massive Marines stepped forward, grabbed his arms with crushing force, and stripped him of his duty belt, weapon, radio, and badge, treating him not as a fellow law enforcement officer, but as a hostile intruder. As they dragged the protesting young man toward the armored vehicles, Thorne turned his gaze toward the guard shack. He saw Corporal Ellison standing at his post, rifle at the ready. Watching the scene unfold, Thorne offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval to the young Marine. The system had worked. The line had been held. Turning his back on the flashing lights and the sobbing police officer, Colonel Darius Thorne walked calmly toward the gate, ready at last to go home. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a low, irritating hum inside the holding cells of the Provost Marshal's office. Officer Cole Brennan sat on a rigid stainless steel bench, hands free of cuffs but spirit entirely broken. Stripped of badge, gun, and radio, he wore only his dark navy uniform, which now felt less like a symbol of authority and more like a clown costume. The adrenaline that had fueled his aggressive swagger on the highway had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollow dread that settled deep in his stomach. Every time a heavily armed Marine MP walked past the barred door, boots clicking sharply on the polished linoleum, Brennan flinched. He was no longer a predator on the perimeter. He was a prisoner of war on a base he had foolishly invaded. Across town, the phone rang in the lavish, oak-paneled bedroom of Oceanside Police Chief Harlan Voss. Woken from deep sleep, Voss answered with the gruff irritability of a man unaccustomed to late disruptions. As the frantic watch commander relayed the details of the incident at Gate 4, the chief's blood ran cold. Arresting a civilian outside the gate was routine. Arresting a Marine was a headache. Assaulting the base commander on federal property was a career-ending catastrophe that threatened to bring the full wrath of the Department of Defense down upon his department. Voss dressed frantically, mind racing through damage control protocols. Brennan was not just any young officer. He was the nephew of State Senator Clifford Hargrove, a powerful local politician who controlled critical funding for the department's pension system. The department had hired the young man as a political favor, quietly ignoring red flags in his psychological evaluation. That favor was now threatening to detonate the entire precinct. When Chief Voss arrived at the Military Installations Visitor Center, he was not greeted with the usual professional courtesy extended to local law enforcement. Instead, he was met by a squad of silent, unsmiling military police who thoroughly searched his vehicle, checked his credentials repeatedly, and escorted him onto the base like a suspected hostile. The drive to the command building felt interminably long. The sprawling infrastructure of the installation loomed in the darkness like a sleeping giant that Brennan had recklessly kicked awake. Inside the command headquarters, the atmosphere was entirely different from the dusty highway. Colonel Darius Thorne sat behind a massive mahogany desk, the very picture of lethal military precision. He had showered, shaved, and changed into his perfectly pressed service uniform. The gold eagles on his collar caught the light, and the 4 rows of ribbons on his chest spoke of a man who had survived hell and demanded respect. Standing to his right was Major Elena Vargas, the base's Judge Advocate General, a brilliant, ruthless military lawyer whose civilian equivalent charged extraordinary fees. When Chief Voss was escorted into the office, he immediately extended his hand, attempting to project cooperative camaraderie. "Colonel Thorne, I cannot apologize enough for this. It's a massive misunderstanding. A rookie mistake by a kid who got overzealous. If you release him to my custody, I assure you he will face severe internal disciplinary action." Thorne did not take the offered hand. He simply stared at the chief, expression carved from granite, and gestured for him to sit in one of the hard-backed chairs opposite the desk. "Sit down, Chief." The quiet authority in his voice left no room for argument. Voss awkwardly retracted his hand and sat, adjusting his collar as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Let us be absolutely clear about the terminology we are using," Thorne said, leaning forward, eyes locked onto Voss's. "This was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is a misplaced piece of paperwork. What your officer did was cross a clearly demarcated federal boundary, illegally detain a federal officer, assault him, and attempt to kidnap him under the color of law. That is a federal crime." Major Vargas stepped forward and dropped a thick bound file onto the center of the mahogany desk with a loud thud. "Chief Voss," she stated, tone entirely devoid of warmth, "your officer, Cole Brennan, is currently being processed for the violations listed in this dossier. Furthermore, we have run a preliminary background check. It appears this is not his first instance of racially motivated escalation, nor his first administrative complaint. The fact that he was patrolling the perimeter of this installation represents gross negligence on the part of your department." "Or they aren't." Voss swallowed hard, sweat forming on his brow despite the air conditioning. He knew they had him cornered, but he had to play his political hand. "Look, Colonel, Major, I understand your anger. It is entirely justified, but we have to look at the bigger picture here. Brennan is the nephew of Senator Clifford Hargrove. If the military formally charges him and turns this into a federal circus, the senator will pull funding, create bureaucratic nightmares for the base's municipal contracts, and turn this into a media spectacle. Nobody wants the press sniffing around a jurisdictional turf war. Let me handle him quietly. He'll resign. You have my word. Olay. Silence stretched across the room, heavy and absolute. Thorne slowly sat back in his leather chair, a look of profound disgust washing over his features. You think I care about local municipal contracts, Chief? His voice dropped to a dangerous, deadly calm. I command thousands of United States Marines. I am responsible for their safety, their training, and their lives. Many of them are young black and brown men and women who drive off this base every single night. If your officer is willing to drag a full-bird colonel out of his car and call him boy right outside my own gate, what in God's name is he doing to my young privates and corporals when no one is watching? Voss opened his mouth to speak, but Thorne held up a hand, silencing him instantly. This is not a negotiation. I am not releasing him. I am formally transferring custody of Cole Brennan to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for Civil Rights Violations. You are dismissed. The bureaucratic storm only intensified. Chief Voss, realizing his own career was now tethered to a sinking ship, immediately contacted District Attorney Victor Lang. Lang was a slick, ambitious prosecutor who had built his career protecting the police union at all costs, viewing law enforcement as his personal political army. He arrived on base armed with a briefcase full of legal threats and flanked by 2 senior investigators, determined to bully the military brass into submission using the full weight of the county's legal apparatus. Once again, the players assembled in the commanding officer's suite. Thorne sat stoically, Major Vargas at his side, while Lang and Voss paced the floor like caged animals. Colonel, you are overstepping your bounds, and frankly, you are playing a dangerous game, Lang sneered, slamming a flash drive onto the desk. I have reviewed the dispatch logs and the dashcam footage from Officer Brennan's cruiser. He observed your vehicle drifting across the center line multiple times. When he initiated the stop, you refused to pull over in a timely manner, forcing him to pursue you. Under the doctrine of hot pursuit, a local law enforcement officer has the legal right to cross a jurisdictional boundary to apprehend a fleeing suspect. Your arrest was lawful. The assault charge you are throwing around is simply an officer using necessary force to subdue a non-compliant suspect. If you do not release Officer Brennan immediately, I will personally file state charges against you for evading arrest and resisting a peace officer. Thorne did not blink. He looked at the flash drive on his desk, then glanced up at Major Vargas. The JAG officer offered a cold, predatory smile. Mr. Lang, that is a fascinating narrative, she said, stepping over to a large monitor mounted on the wall. But before you file those state charges, we should probably review the evidence together. She tapped a few keys on a wireless keyboard. The large screen flickered to life. You see, the dashcam footage you just referenced, the footage your department uploaded to the county servers, seems to be missing a few crucial seconds. Specifically, the timestamp shows a sudden jump right before the colonel crosses the boundary line. It conveniently edits out the fact that he was fully stopped with his blinker on before Officer Brennan ever exited his vehicle. Lang's smug expression faltered. Technology glitches happen. The core facts remain. The core facts, Thorne interrupted, voice booming through the room, are that you are attempting to extort a federal officer with doctored evidence. Vargas pressed another button. The screen split into 4 high-definition video feeds. What you failed to realize, Mr. Lang, is that Gate 4 was recently upgraded with the Department of Defense's new Sentinel surveillance package. Camera 1, infrared thermal, showing clear heat signatures of both vehicles, proving the colonel's brakes were applied slowly and legally. Camera 2, license plate reader, demonstrating the exact speed and trajectory of the Taurus. Flawless driving. 0 deviation from the lane. Camera 3, overhead angle capturing the exact moment Brennan parked his cruiser. The yellow boundary line is vividly visible, with Brennan stepping out on the federal side. Camera 4, high-definition audio video from the guard shack's directional microphone, capturing the entire interaction with crystal-clear audio, including Brennan's racial language, the sound of the handcuffs clicking, and the colonel's repeated warnings regarding jurisdiction. As the evidence played, Vargas turned back to the pale-faced district attorney. The footage from our military-grade security systems provides a continuous, uninterrupted record of the event. It proves unequivocally that Colonel Thorne committed no traffic violation, did not evade arrest, and was entirely compliant while being illegally assaulted. Thorne stood, placing both hands flat on his desk and leaning toward the two local officials. The sheer physical presence of the man forced Lang to take a step back. "Now, here is the reality of your situation," he said softly, though the threat in his voice was deafening. "Officer Brennan is guilty of federal crimes, but by presenting edited footage to a military commander in an attempt to secure his release, you, Mr. Lang, and you, Chief Voss, have just conspired to obstruct a federal investigation. You have crossed a line far more dangerous than the one painted on the asphalt outside my gate." Voss looked as though he might be physically sick. Lang's bravado had entirely vanished, replaced by the panicked realization that his political career was currently burning to the ground. What do you want?" Lang stammered, eyes darting toward the door as if searching for an escape. "I already told the chief what I want," Thorne replied, gaze unyielding. "I want Brennan turned over to the FBI. But now I want something else. I want a joint task force led by the Department of Justice, not your corrupt county office, to review every single arrest officer Brennan has made. If he has railroaded any of my Marines, or any civilian for that matter, you will reopen those cases and vacate those convictions. Furthermore, you will issue a public statement. You will not mention my name. You will simply state that Officer Brennan has been terminated for egregious misconduct and turned over to federal authorities, and that your office is cooperating fully with the DOJ investigation. If you attempt to spin this, if you attempt to use Senator Hargrove to retaliate against this base, Major Vargas will release this unedited footage to every major news network in the country, along with the proof that your office attempted to doctor evidence." Thorne turned to the door and opened it. A squad of MPs stood waiting in the hallway. "You have a short window to contact the Department of Justice and initiate the investigation. Get off my base." A convoy of deeply tinted black Chevrolet Suburbans rolled smoothly past the fortified barriers of Gate 4, bypassing the Civilian Visitor Center entirely. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. Stepping out of the lead vehicle was Special Agent Harlan Pierce, a veteran federal investigator with a reputation for dismantling corrupt police precincts with surgical precision. Pierce was not interested in local politics, municipal budgets, or police union posturing. He operated strictly on federal statutes, and the dossier Major Vargas had transmitted had triggered an immediate, massive deployment. Inside the Provost Marshal's holding facility, Cole Brennan had spent the intervening hours trapped in a spiral of mounting terror. The artificial daylight of the fluorescent bulbs above his cell offered no comfort. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the laser sights of the Marine M4 rifles dancing across his chest. When the heavy steel door of the cell block finally swung open, Brennan scrambled to his feet, a desperate glimmer of hope flickering in his chest. High expected to see Chief Voss coming to bail him out, perhaps with a stern reprimand and a quiet ride home. Instead, he saw Agent Pierce, flanked by two imposing federal agents, and Captain Ellery. "Cole Brennan," Pierce announced, voice echoing off the concrete walls with terrifying finality. "I am Special Agent Pierce with the FBI. You are being taken into federal custody. You are formally charged with attempted kidnapping, assault on a federal officer, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Panic seized Brennan's throat. He backed away until his spine hit the cold cinder block wall. "Wait, no. My uncle is Senator Clifford Hargrove. Chief Voss said this was being handled internally. You can't do this. Your chief is currently under investigation for conspiracy to obstruct justice, and your uncle has no jurisdiction over the United States Department of Justice," Pierce replied coldly, stepping into the cell. "Turn around, Mr. Brennan. You are no longer a police officer. You are a federal suspect." The cold, heavy steel of federal handcuffs locked around Brennan's wrists, a poetic and devastating reversal of the previous confrontation. As they marched him out of the holding facility and into the blinding light, Brennan caught a glimpse of Colonel Darius Thorne standing silently near the command building. The colonel was dressed in pristine combat utilities, posture rigid, expression unreadable. Thorne did not gloat. He did not smile. He simply watched the predator being hauled away in a cage. Far away in a plush, mahogany-lined office in the state capitol, Senator Clifford Hargrove slammed his telephone receiver down with enough force to crack the plastic housing. He was a man accustomed to getting his way, a political heavyweight who wielded municipal budgets like a bludgeon. For hours, he had been frantically calling every contact he had at the Pentagon, demanding that this rogue colonel be severely reprimanded and his nephew released. His efforts hit a titanium wall. The Pentagon's legislative liaison had flatly refused to intervene. The military brass had already reviewed the unedited Sentinel surveillance footage securely transmitted by Major Vargas. They saw one of their most decorated combat commanders being racially abused and violently assaulted by a local officer on federal property. Instead of reprimanding Thorne, the Department of Defense threw its absolute, unyielding support behind him, formally requesting the Department of Justice to prosecute Brennan to the maximum extent of the law. Senator Hargrove realized, with a sinking feeling of dread, that his nephew had not merely picked a fight with a black man in a dusty car. He had picked a fight with the entire United States Marine Corps, and he had done it on camera. The political fallout would be radioactive. If the senator attempted to defend his nephew now, he would be publicly defending a racially motivated, abusive officer who attacked a decorated war hero. To save his own political skin, the senator immediately drafted a press release condemning his nephew's actions and completely abandoned him to the federal system. Back on the base, the atmosphere was electric. Rumors of the standoff at Gate 4 had spread through the barracks like wildfire. The young Marines, many of whom had experienced their own unfair share of harassment from the local police just outside the gates, felt a profound surge of pride. Their commanding officer had not simply talked about leadership and defending his troops. He had stood on the boundary line, taken the hit, and systematically dismantled the corrupt system that threatened them all. Corporal Vance Ellison was ordered to report to the base commander's office. He arrived nervously, uniform immaculate, boots polished to a mirror shine, and stood at rigid attention before the massive desk. Colonel Thorne looked up from a stack of reports, eyes softening slightly as he regarded the young Marine who had initiated the code red response. "At ease, Corporal." Ellison relaxed his stance slightly, hands clasped behind his back. "Sir, you acted decisively," Thorne began, deep voice carrying a tone of absolute respect. "You correctly identified a threat. You abandoned standard protocol when the situation demanded extreme urgency, and you locked down this installation perfectly. You protected the perimeter, and you protected me." "It is my duty, sir," Ellison replied, voice steady though his heart swelled with pride. "It is," Thorne agreed. "But doing your duty when the threat wears a police uniform and operates just inches from our jurisdiction requires a specific kind of courage. I have thousands of young men and women on this base. Many of them look like me. I know what happens when they drive off this base at night. I know the profiling they face. What we accomplished was not just about protecting a colonel. It was about drawing a line in the sand for every single Marine who serves here. We take care of our own. You demonstrated that flawlessly." Thorne stood, walked around the desk, and offered his hand. Ellison took it, feeling the firm, calloused grip of a combat veteran. "Outstanding work, Marine. Dismissed." As Ellison marched out of the office, Thorne walked to the window and looked out over the sprawling base. The sun reflected off the rooftops of the barracks and the distant, shimmering ocean. He had won the battle, but he knew the larger struggle for accountability was far from finished. The Joint Task Force, led by the Department of Justice, proved to be a cleansing fire. Agent Pierce's team meticulously audited every single arrest, traffic stop, and incident report filed by Cole Brennan during his tenure. The findings were horrific, yet entirely predictable. Brennan had systematically targeted minorities, specifically young Black and Hispanic Marines returning to base late. He had fabricated probable cause, falsified field sobriety tests, and routinely escalated minor infractions into violent arrests to stroke his own ego. Armed with this undeniable pattern of civil rights abuses, the Department of Justice expanded its net. District Attorney Victor Lang, facing a federal indictment for conspiracy to obstruct justice by attempting to use doctored dashcam footage, chose self-preservation over a lengthy prison sentence. He resigned in utter disgrace, surrendered his law license, and agreed to cooperate with the federal investigators. Chief Harlan Voss, realizing he was thoroughly trapped by the DOJ's sprawling investigation into his department's systemic failure to discipline Brennan, took an early, highly publicized, and deeply humiliating retirement. The climax of the ordeal took place in a sterile federal courtroom. Cole Brennan, completely stripped of his swagger, his uniform, and his political protection, stood before a no-nonsense federal judge. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled to a waist chain. He looked pale, gaunt, and terrified. Knowing he stood zero chance against the unedited Sentinel surveillance footage and the testimony of the United States Marine Corps, Brennan had accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to all federal charges to avoid a full trial. Colonel Darius Thorne was present in the gallery, seated quietly in the back row. He was dressed in civilian clothes, a sharp, dark suit that commanded just as much respect as his military uniform. He watched stoically as the judge addressed the disgraced former officer. "Mr. Brennan," the judge said, voice laced with absolute disdain, "law enforcement officers are granted extraordinary power by the state to protect the public. You weaponize that power. You allowed your racial bias and your unchecked arrogance to dictate your actions, and in doing so, you betrayed the badge, the public trust, and the very foundation of justice. You attacked a federal military installation and assaulted a decorated officer of the United States Armed Forces. You are a disgrace to every honorable officer who wears a uniform." The judge's gavel fell. "I sentence you to a lengthy term in federal prison to be followed by supervised release. You are permanently barred from ever holding a position in law enforcement or public office. Take him away." Owie! Brennan broke down, sobbing openly as the U.S. Marshals grabbed his arms and dragged him toward the holding cells. He looked back over his shoulder, tear-filled eyes searching the gallery. For a fleeting second, he locked eyes with Thorne. The colonel's expression did not change. He offered no smile of triumph, no nod of vindication. He merely watched the consequences of unchecked arrogance play out to their inevitable conclusion. That evening, the coastal fog rolled back over the military base, blanketing the perimeter in a cool, damp mist. Thorne sat in his modest on-base quarters, sipping a cup of black coffee. The news networks were running the story of Brennan's sentencing, highlighting the Department of Justice investigation that had overturned numerous wrongful convictions orchestrated by the rogue officer. The system, for once, had worked, but Thorne knew it had worked only because he possessed the rank, the resources, and the unassailable fortress of a military base behind him. He thought of all the civilians who did not have a garrison of heavily armed Marines to protect them from men like Brennan. Setting his coffee mug down, Thorne stood, grabbed his worn leather jacket, and slid his arms into the faded sleeves. He took his keys and walked out to the dusty 2012 Ford Taurus. He drove slowly through the quiet streets of the installation, the familiar hum of the engine a comforting sound. As he approached Gate 4, he saw the massive Delta barriers resting flush with the asphalt, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The heavy steel gates stood open, allowing the steady flow of late traffic. Thorne pulled his vehicle into the exit lane and brought it to a gentle halt just before the painted yellow boundary line. He rolled down his window. Stepping out of the guard shack, M4 rifle slung securely across his chest, was Corporal Vance Ellison. The young Marine approached the vehicle, posture perfect, eyes scanning the perimeter with practiced vigilance. "Evening, Colonel." Thorne returned the salute with a relaxed, steady hand. "Evening, Corporal. Is the perimeter secure?" "Perimeter is secure, sir," Ellison replied, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "No unauthorized personnel in sight. The line is holding." Thorne nodded slowly, looking out past the boundary line into the dark stretch of coastal highway. The road was empty. The flashing lights were gone. The predator had been removed from the shadows. "Keep up the good work, Marine." "Semper Fi, sir." Rolling up his window, Colonel Darius Thorne shifted the Taurus into drive. He crossed the yellow line, left the heavy protection of the base behind, and drove out into the night, unafraid of the dark. True leadership is not measured by the uniform a person wears. It is measured by the willingness to hold the line when no one else will. Colonel Thorne's tactical brilliance and absolute refusal to bow to corrupt authority dismantled a broken system and protected his troops from a rogue predator. Justice is never simply given. It is demanded.